Hi, good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming today. Welcome to Representing Tabular Data in Alfresco Share. We optimistically call this smooth like butter. I hope you like the interface we show today. It was a solution we created for one of our clients. So basically today we're going to talk about a real-world solution where we were challenged with representing some tabular data in Share, and sort of what are the challenges around representing data that way. And there's not only viewing it, entering it, but also being able to retrieve it later through external systems that call Alfresco through web scripts. So we'll review Alfresco 3.4 deployment where we had a client where they actually had a challenge modeling some of their data, and we helped them through that. And one of the important things for me today is I want to talk not only through sort of what we did and how the tabular data stuff works, but also some of the paths that we went down and discussed and thought about that we didn't choose. I think that's something that'll be helpful for you for a take-home, is that you'll be able to use this information on your own. So before I move on, a couple of things. I want to introduce Terrence. He's from our office. He has a sign-up sheet if you're interested in hearing more about Bluefish. He's one of our solutions architects, and I'm a senior technical consultant at Bluefish Development Group. So let's move on to our agenda today. Our objectives of this presentation today, really an overview of the challenges our client faced while modeling, trying to model the data to be able to model it, enter it, view it, and report it. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about our client so you kind of understand what they do and what their business is, so you kind of have an idea of what it was they're trying to accomplish with Alfresco. And then we'll go into the different architectures. First show some of their forms so you can see the data, and then go into some of the different architectures and why we chose not to go down those paths. Then I have a couple of demos. So we're on a 1024 by 768 projector, and it was really difficult to show their forms because they take a lot more real estate. So two things. I have some screenshots where I've squished down their stuff, and we'll show some of those actual modeled forms, and you can kind of think back to their real paper forms and see kind of how they stack up. But also, I have a sort of a simple demo that I've created with kind of some real-world data where we have like an address book example, and anybody who are runners out here, some running time log entries where we have some subtables nested. So you get examples of both kind of a regular table data and also a table with nested tables. So we'll show both of those. And that demo, not only will I demo it here, I'm going to make the code available so you can take it home and try it out and see. It should work in 4.x or 3.4. And then after kind of the demo, we'll go into a review of the architecture and just talk about it a little bit about how all these pieces fit together. Real quick, just want to talk about who is Bluefish. We're an Alfresco Platinum partner. We've been in the ECM space for about 13 years. We have a kind of a mix of mid-market and large clients. And we have partnerships not only with Alfresco, but also with Contigo and Effisoft. So I want to move on to the background on our client. Our client is actually Drilling Info, and we actually have a separate webinar where you can see a lot more details, and I'll have a link to that later. But their challenge is they digitize oil and gas industry information, and there's all these forms that are available that are paper. And they digitize that information, and then they have tools that do analysis on that and basically make it available to their end customers who then retrieve the data. They actually are creating data, form by form, state by state, digitizing this information, and it needs to be searched by the customers. And not only do they need to retrieve the metadata, but then their customers also want the ability to go out and grab the scan of the original form as well. Now they have about 30 data management employees, and those employees have a variety of experience levels. They may be relatively new to entering form data, or they may have been around for quite a while. And so they have expected to do about 20 to 100 forms per day. Now, as you might expect, when your data is everything to your business, once the data entry is done, they move into a quality control process. One of the interesting things about this is they actually choose a subset of forms that are entered based on the experience level of the data technician and decide how many of those forms that need to be sort of reviewed by a QC person before they can go off to being published. The forms are complex. There is a mix. Much of the data is tabular, sort of like table form, but not all of it. And so we'll go through a form so you can see it. The forms do vary by state. Our first phase that we worked with them was for North Dakota, but there are other states they're going to roll on. So now our solution needed to be flexible enough to allow for future growth where they could add additional state forms and new forms that come in and so forth. And lastly, so the forms need also to be able to easy to enter and review. So you imagine you're a data entry person, and you're looking at a paper or a scan of a paper form, and you're trying to enter this data. Well, you need to get through those quickly. And so the flow needs to make sense such that you're not wasting a lot of time when you're trying to enter the data. And so that was one of our challenges. And then on the flip side, if you're a quality control person, you need to be able to also quickly review the data and make sure the data is correct. So that was another challenge we came up when we were making the forms for Alfresco Share for them to enter the data. And lastly, their business is not just entering data, it's getting their end customers' data. And so the data had to be extractable in a way that was easy for them to digest so they could do their additional downstream processing and provide it to their end customers. I want to take one step up, I guess, or back, and talk a little bit about why Alfresco. Why did they choose Alfresco? And they had kind of a homebrew system, I guess, they had put together over time that they had sort of outgrown. But I want to talk a little bit about kind of the surround of this. And there's actually, like I said, we have done a webinar on this whole process, and it's really interesting to watch the business case. And that webinar is available from Alfresco's website. But they're doing some other things beyond the tabular data customization that I wanted to discuss. They use a lot of simple workflows to move things around. We have custom logic for their lifecycle for determining how many documents of a given set from a user need to go to be quality controlled. And data gets published. They're using replication in Alfresco to move data from a manufacturing kind of entry system over to a presentation system where the data is then pulled out by their downstream systems. They use REST APIs to pull the metadata, and also they're able to hit Alfresco to bring back the originals or scans of the forms so their end users can see those. We have the share customizations. One of the things we do, we talk about data entry. So the tabular data is going to help make it easier to enter. But if you guys are familiar with document details page, well, if you want to look at the form and enter metadata at the same time, they're not together. So we have a sort of a document indexing module that we created on top of Share where they see the representation of the form. They can enter metadata right next to it. They have a queue of documents. When they finish a form, it goes to the next one, and so on and so on and so on. So they can iterate through a bunch of forms quickly. We also have some additional sort of helper customizations for like data list-backed lookups for some of their form fields. So they do auto-completion. They start typing a field like a county name or something. It'll auto-complete, and it'll fill out the form. So I want to show an example of one of their forms. This is just one of their forms, and it's a North Dakota well completion form. And so the data is very technical, right? But I want you to kind of look more at the structure. So a well completion, basically, if you're a drilling company and you want to go off and drill a well, you would need to file these with the state that describes what you did. Where did you drill the well? Who did it? Who are the contractors involved? How far down did you drill? If you're doing fracking, what did you use to do fracking, and those types of information. That's all contained within the form. So now I apologize in advance. This is, again, we're on a small resolution, so it's going to take like 3 pages of slides to get through the form. I won't spend a lot of time on it. But the thing I want you to notice is there's a lot of data that is fairly straightforward to model just with standard Alfresco modeling, right? It's a lot of one-to-one mappings. You can easily model a bunch of this stuff. And so there was really no need to sort of replace the entire model concept here, right? We had plenty of stuff in here that would be supportable easily by a standard form. But if you move down to the bottom here where this casing record is, there's a bunch of tabular data here, another table, and then more data that could be sort of put in a table form. This is actually the Frac detail area where they end up with sub-tables when they do the data entry. And then obviously the last page here is two other tables, and then some just comment data. So it's kind of a mix, right? It's a mix of simple data and a mix of tabular data. So based on this and some other of their forms that are similar to this, we decided, how many ways do we have to approach this? What can we do? How are we going to model this? So I want to walk through these because I hope it's valuable to you today when you're thinking about a problem like this, that there's not only one way to solve this. We could have gone down a couple of paths, right? So I want to tell you what we decided, and hopefully you can take that home, and maybe it'll help you with some of your deployments. The first approach is well, I call it, in quotes, the easiest approach, right? Everything on that form we're going to model brute force-wise to a single field in Alfresco and a model. The next level, I guess, is correlated repeating attributes, where we're going to use Alfresco properties that support multiples. And then we'll have multiple values in an array for each column. And I'll show some examples of what I'm talking about in the next slides. Our third concept was maybe we'll go with a hierarchical approach, where we're doing a base object for the form, and then we're adding child objects as rows in the table. And then we move into, hey, we could do a completely custom kind of share add-in or share replacement or something, build something completely custom, Java-backed solution that was fairly custom. And lastly, the last option is use a custom data structure for the tables and use something like XML or JSON to model it or to store it, and then use a technology like JQuery or JQuery to actually provide the display functionality and the control. So I want to talk real quickly about the kind of the pros and cons of these and why we went down the path that we did. So this is kind of esoteric looking, I guess, but it's supposed to be kind of, these are Alfresco properties, right? So your usual, little namespace prefix and then a property name. So if we had a 4-column, 4-row table, we would need 16 properties. If we had a 10 columns and 4 rows, it'd be 40, so on and so forth. You can do it this way, and for some initial proof of concepts, we had some models like this, but there's a lot of problems. Obviously the pros are it's easy to create the form and a model file because you're not doing anything custom. You're just modeling the standard way, no deep customizations to share. It works well kind of with a standard view and edit logic in Alfresco share. There's no problem there. If you wanted, you could do some tweaks to where you take some of the make some custom FTLs based on Alfresco's existing stuff to where you could make additional columns, squeeze things down, maybe change the field sizes to be smaller so it looks more like a kind of a spreadsheet view versus a spread out field sizes. Obviously the cons of this, if you have a bunch of large tables, you're going to have a ton of properties, right? It's going to be kind of a mess. In addition, you need to know up front, what is the maximum number of rows on any given form, on this entire state that I'm ever going to have. Because if you decide on a value and you're wrong, then you have to go back and edit your model to add additional properties. And then there's no really concept of like if they had to remove a row or if they had to remove a row, there's no real easy way to do that if you're just using properties. You're going to end up with a gap in your data. And obviously this doesn't really address subtables. And lastly, advanced searching with this is difficult because you're going to be searching on individual fields, and you probably aren't going to know exactly which field in a giant table you're looking for. So the next idea we had was, well, let's think about correlated repeating attributes. And so in our Alfresco model here, we have a property we've created, and we've allowed it to be multiple. And we basically have an array of values. So this is your columns in your spreadsheet, basically, in a table. And then the array position are your rows. And so we'll just add up these values, and then we're going to correlate them by their position in the array as to what row they belong to. And this seems like it would be a reasonable approach, but we're still having the subtable issue. We can't really deal with nested tables very well. We also had seen problems with certain types of data where you can't enter blanks or nulls because it ignores it and assumes everything is moved up. And so we get off position in some of those. So that was a big problem we ran into. And by default, data entry would be non-tabular in nature, and we still need to do some customizations and share to display that data. Our next concept was, hey, let's look at using child objects. We'll make a form as an object, and then each row will represent an object, and we'll create parent-child associations between all of these. So we went down that approach, thought about that, but we were worried about some of the complexities of transactions and node associations. Also, the shares form engine really doesn't, like out of the box, provide the concept of, hey, I'm going to enter a data for a bunch of objects, and behind the scenes, you guys figure out where it goes. And so we would have to do a lot of work there. But the advantage of this we would be using kind of standard objects, and Alfresco understands the concepts of those associations. And so, it would deal with all the good stuff of Alfresco would work properly, and we wouldn't have to worry so much about upgrades and things like that. I threw a note in here. There was actually a lot of talk, and it's on the Alfresco wiki, about during the phase when they're talking about the Swift release that they might have component relations. And so there may be features in the future that come out that provide a better approach for this, but it wasn't in 3.4 when we were doing this, and it's not still in the current version of 4. But I want to throw that in there as a note, and there is a wiki article on this if you're interested in taking a look at it. The second to last approach was, what if we wrote a completely custom sort of Java solution and sort of sat inside of share or outside of share or something along those lines, and we wrote customizations on the back end to deal with that. Our concerns there is, you lose some of the benefits of all the built-in good stuff of share. It might be hard to upgrade because we don't know if it's a totally custom solution what we're going to end up with. And then obviously, expense, right? There's going to be a lot of customizations here. But we would have complete flexibility on how we display things, either within or outside of share. So the last one is, hey, instead of going down these paths, what if we extend, and I put extend in air quotes because we're not actually programmatically changing anything. But let's make more use of the standard fields in Alfresco and kind of add on to what they're doing. So in this example, we have the usual types of data that you'd expect kind of in a model, where we have like a text field, a long field, and so forth. But here we have a text field and we have a structured string. And that structured string is basically JSON. And that string contains JSON data, and it gets written off to Alfresco as if it was just a string. So with this idea, we're extending, and again in air quotes, we're actually not changing anything behind the scenes in the repo. But it greatly reduces sort of the server-side customizations we would need to do, right? We're not having to change anything on the server side, really. And we're not really having to worry about dealing with multiple objects and transactions with multiple objects. It's just a single object with a bunch of properties, some of which are extended strings, basically, with structured data. So we can leverage all the standard out-of-the-box Alfresco features. Now, the downside is data entry people aren't going to really want to look at a JSON string, right, to enter data. That's going to be miserable. So that won't work. So we have to come up with a custom API for sort of viewing the data and extracting the data downstream, right? We need to parse this in some way that their downstream systems understand. There's still going to be some limitations to search functionality because you can search within the string, but you're going to get basically one field with a large string of all the values. So there's not really a good way around that for this right now, for this approach. And it does obviously require custom share controls, as I mentioned up here. We have to come up with a way to display the data. So the winner is, right, what did we decide? Probably for all the detail in the last one, you realize it was the last approach we chose. We did choose to go with a sort of extended approach where we're adding structured string data to a text field. We're still going to use regular, and again, quotes, regular data for most fields, but the tabular data is going to be structured as a JSON string. This means that we also needed to create custom controls and share to display this data with a controller in JavaScript to actually drive the data model and create the structure of the tables and so forth. And then we decided to use JQuery and JQuery as the tools we use to develop those tables. And then lastly, we created web scripts to allow retrieval of this data, structuring the entire set of metadata as a JSON, basically JSON, and passing it back to their downstream systems. So I'm going to go through a demonstration. I wanted to show their actual forms because even though it's very technical data and it's kind of random, it doesn't make sense to us who aren't well-field engineers. It shows you sort of the complexity of what they're trying to model. Then I'm going to jump into a live demonstration of an Alfresco system where I've created basically a kind of a simple address book type model. And it's just a simple set of data. And then we go into another kind of a nested example where I'm doing like a record of a runner's running times from a bunch of different races and stuff. And those are easy to grasp ideas and models. So I wanted to show those as well. And then lastly, I'll do a quick demonstration of the web script running just so you can see what the output of the data looks like. So let's take a look at their form. So I want to show you first. So we're using the forms development kit. So we're using the tabular view. So they have a lot of tabs. So we're trying to scrunch things down, right? This is a page of just regular fields, right? There's no tabular data here. The only unusual things on this, I'll just mention this, is this field and this field are the ones that I talk about being auto-completions, where when they're starting to type a county name, it has a web script call back to a data list that we overload, that we pull back the data for these. And that saves them a lot of time entering data. There's several of these in the form. So this is all regular stuff. Like if you're designing a form in Share, this is, we do this all the time. The second page is the well tab. You can see we have our first sort of tabular control. Basically, there's only one entry on this one. And then we get some more complex data. These are actually two different tabs. I've put them on one slide to speed things up. But you can see here the issue we have of an integer value here, but above it there's 3 blanks. And here, the same problem, there's 4 blanks. So the data is not consistent when they're entering it. There may not be data for some of these positions. So that's a problem we would have if we try to do correlated repeating attributes. But you can see that the view with JQuery, it looks just, I mean, if you're a data entry person, it looks just like a spreadsheet. I'm going to enter data in a spreadsheet. It's easy, no problem. And the last tab is our tracking data. So we actually have functionality we added to keep track of everything that's going on. When anybody makes changes to the document, their quality control people can take a look at who did what and when, and it's all recorded in a tab so they can go back and take a look at it. This is a Frac detail form, and this is where it gets really complex. And I'll try to demonstrate. So we have a table here, basically, and then we have a nested table here and here. Now this one has no data. This one has a row, but it has a subtable. And so all of this gets built up into JSON. So behind the scenes, this is all JSON, right? But what the client sees looks like, oh, nested tables, no problem. So before I go into architecture, I want to show you kind of set the stage for kind of the more sort of real-world example. Unless any of you are oil field engineers, and I apologize if I insulted you. But I'm sure we don't all understand this data. So I have two examples. One is an address list. So let's imagine you have a company, and you want to know all the branches. And so you just have basically like an address book. So it's just a simple table. The other example is, like I said, if I'm a runner and I have a lot of race results, and the main table is a list of the results, and some of those may have split times. So if you guys have ever run a race, a split time is if you run a marathon, they're going to catch your time at 5 miles, at 10 miles, and 15 miles, and 20 miles, hopefully, and then you'll see how well your pace was. If you're a good runner, your paces will be about even. If you're me, your paces will slowly deteriorate into terrible times toward the end. But anyway, so I'll show both of those, and these will be available. I want to make one comment. I made some additional code available. I'm going to actually make some amps available. I need to rebuild these as amps and just push them up. And that way you don't have to mess around trying to put this in Eclipse. You can just push the amps out and make use of them. So let me show real quick. And I actually have to drive this way, unfortunately. So we have our corporate docs here. And you can see here, this is an imaginary form here, right, that I made up for our example here. But that basically there's tabular data here. There's some simple data and some tabular data. And so down here in the view page, you can see here's all my simple data, and here's all the tabular data. Now, our client doesn't ever actually do this, but this does support sorting. You can make it support sorting. JQuery can deal with that. So actually here in the view, you can, I don't know, east at the top, west at the top, I'm actually sorting live. They don't do that, right, because their data is very formatted. It's kind of fun for the example, though. So if I put an unsorted list in, I can actually have a sort field and sort it, and it's rewriting the JSON in the data model. And if you hit save, it writes it out sorted. So that's kind of cool, and I'll show that real quick. So right now, West is on top, so I'm going to go to edit the form. I want to talk about a couple of things on the edit screen. So there is and real quick, I'm actually going to switch back to, I'm going to duplicate my monitor here so I don't break my neck. You guys see that okay? Okay. So we can do inline entry. So if I'm a quality control person, I can come back and enter more stuff if I need to. We do validations. And in this example code I provided, there are some validations. So if I put a invalid, so there's a regular expression behind this as a validator, basically. And if you put invalid data, it turns bright red. Notice at the bottom, the event has been bubbled up, so the save button is disabled. So we're actually tied into the rest of Alfresco forms. I'll make my data valid again. And then this is actually just the view. Now you can edit inline, but this is not really how the client does entry. They use this approach. And they actually get a pop-up box. And so imagine you're a data entry person. You have a set of fields for your table. This is on the right side of your screen. In the middle of your screen is the document. So you're looking at the table and the document. You're typing these as you go. Now, if you're a data entry person, what do you not want to do, right? You don't want to use your mouse. So if I do, I'm just tabbing and entering data. Let's, the invalid is valid now. Now I can hit tab and submit and say, oh, it didn't go away. Why did that happen? And you can see I added there it is. I added it. but it didn't go away. But there's a reason for that. Let me save this off real quick. So they actually can keep that form up. Oh, and so you can see my data has been added there. They can actually keep that form up, enter all of their data, just keep going, bam, 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 until they're done the table. Then you just hit escape and it's gone. So I'm going to show you the, now again, the client, this is the don't try this at home part, but it is kind of fun to be able to say, oh, I'm going to sort this data. I'm going to make West on top. I'm going to save this. And I should see it now sorted that way, because we're just reordering the data model in memory. So you can see West is on top now. I have some weird display issues when I'm duplicated. That's why I was running extended before. But so then I'm going to show real quick also the other one that you guys will have as an example to take home. So like I call this a runner report. Let me so here we have a little more complex data, right? We got some simple metadata still, but we have table data here, 3 entries, but one of our tables here has a subtable. So I want to show how that gets modeled. So here you can view at a high level, but if you open one of these up, you can see the split times. And I didn't make any of these sortable, so I can't have fun with those. But you can see a subtable here. And so you could enter that for all of these if needed. And really the entry form, I'm going to bring my display back real quick. Entering data in a subgrid would be just like entering data in the regular grid. And I don't have and this one I've put in some validators, right? So I can't put in a non-valid time, right? It has to be hour, minute, second. So it won't let me actually save that. Let me demonstrate that real quick too. So I put invalid data here. If I try to submit that, we put a text string that says, hey, you can't do that. You need to be in the form of whatever message you want, basically customizable. And I'll send my monitor back. Extend node. So that's a quick demonstration, basically, of the tabular data. And you can see that whoops, you see I've lost my presentation. OK, we're back. So just talk about the architecture real quick. So I'm going to walk through, this is just a logical architecture diagram. And I'm going to start here at the repository level. The key point here is basically nothing has changed. We're still using a model file. We're not really changing anything about that. It's just a normal model file. Okay? So at the repository level, business as usual. No big customizations there. At the share level, we're overriding form.get.head.ftl to have some additional JS includes. Right? We got the JQuery libraries and jQuery and good stuff like that. So that's really the only change. So you're adding some includes. The share form itself is what you'd be used to creating a share form. You're defining what attributes you're going to show. The only difference is when you get to the attributes that are tabular, instead of going to the default text viewer, you're going to use a custom control called tabular grid FTL. And this is the typical type of FTL that you would create if you were going to create a custom component to display data. It's nothing unusual about the architecture of that. Now notice below that there's a little schema definition, and that's kind of where the magic happens. The FTL file looks for a parameter that points to an XML file that defines the schema of the table. And it reads that set of values, that schema, and it passes it back to its controller. And that controller relies on that schema definition to figure out what columns to lay out and how. So when this gets called, we go back to our JavaScript controller, and that basically decides how the table layout needs to be structured based on the column definitions. And it takes the JSON and it makes it into a readable form for for the users and creates all the tables, adds all the validators and listeners and good stuff to the table, and then that gets rendered and displayed to the end user. And keep in mind, when we were messing around with the table order and all that good stuff, there's an in-memory data model that's getting updated that gets saved off once you've completed your changes. Underneath what we've done here is just JQGrid and JQuery, which are both open source. And I have pointers to those if you want to try those out at some point. The only other component really here is this represents their downstream servers that are making web calls back to the repository tier to get metadata and to also get copies of the actual scans of the documents if needed. And let's move forward. So let's walk through the components real quick. So the schema, and actually after we do this, I'm going to show you kind of examples of each. I don't want to do like a code walk because it's kind of tedious, but I'll show you kind of where they live in Eclipse because we will provide the source code as an example. So the schema definition file, it's just an XML file. It needs to be in the format that makes sense to JQGrid to define the column names and the IDs and so forth. The free marker control actually just points at the appropriate schema as a parameter. Now the importance of that is, you can make as many of these schema files as you need. You can represent a whole bunch of grids. Your control is going to have a parameter that points to the appropriate one. So we have a bunch of different tables in that form I demonstrated previously, but we have a bunch of schema definitions. And so, for example, in the example that I have here, we have two different XML files that I'll show that define the one table for the business addresses and the other table for the runner times. So it's really flexible. I mean, once you've created this architecture, basically it's a matter of creating a new schema file that defines how you want the grid to be laid out, and then pointing to it from your share form. It is an XML, and not only does it define the columns and so forth, you can add your descriptions of the validators, the types of stuff that you want. For example, that zip code was a regular expression that looks for a certain format of the string and won't let you put anything in that doesn't match that. There's also like a pop-up entry form. That pop-up entry form where I was showing you, where I was going through and adding data, you can define the size of that and so forth. And again, we override the form head FTL. This is pretty simple. We're just adding some CSS and JScript includes. The tabular grid control is a custom control. But if you're familiar with the form controls that are out there for Alfresco already, it doesn't look much different than that. It's the same kind of idea. So we basically use that concept and created our own control. And you pointed that instead of the default control for the data type. So instead of letting text be rendered by its normal control, which actually would work, right? It would display just fine, except it would display as a raw JSON string, which would be really hard to manipulate and edit. And again, there's a grid size definition in the form, so you can change the layout. Actually, making things fit on this resolution was quite a challenge. So, but we normally have 1900 pixel wide monitors. Custom controller. So it's about that was a little bit involved. That's our custom controller behind the scenes. It's about 500 lines of JavaScript code that builds up the grid, maintains its state, and so forth. Adds all the validating fields and event listeners and stuff that, like when you try to update or do unblur and things like that, that it checks to see that the data is valid. It uses the schema file to know how to build up the table. And then it also looks in the schema file to determine what validators need to be added and so forth. So if you have anything to check for a certain regular expression or something like that, you can do that. The last part is the custom web scripts, which basically just package everything up into metadata to be digested by their downstream servers. And again, the examples I provide here are pretty simple, but the whole architecture is what's important, right? All these pieces fit together. You can extend this. You can add tons of columns or whatever you need, things like that. But this is a good example that's kind of a real world. So let me, before I talk about the key points, let me just real quick. This is the, first off, this is the nothing up my sleeves part of the presentation. Okay, this is my model. So here's that field where it was tabular data is just a text field. That's for the runner race results. And the same thing for the company branches. We're just using a text field. So that's the model side, right? That's the repo model. Then we define a set of columns, basically, in the schema that's used by a tabular grid to build up the columns and so forth. And in some cases, we may have edit rules that validate whether you're entering valid data or not. So I have a regular expression here. You must enter in this certain format, or it won't accept the data. So that's the schema form. And then the form .get.head.ftl is a standard out. I guess it's going away at some point. But for the near future, it's the standard way to sort of override the standard behavior is to add your logic in the bottom. So we're just adding some includes at the bottom. The rest at the top is just the standard stuff. Tabular grid control. So this is just the typical control you might use to display a property in the share form. The key part down at the bottom is we're calling the grid object, which is what we define in our controller. And then our controller sort of has all the magic of creating the grid. And I thought about stepping through all this, but this is one of those things that you can take it home and take a look at it because it has a lot of logic. But it does basically the idea is you're passing the information behind the scenes. It's talking to using JQuery, but it's responsible for building up all the controls and the validators and so forth. So real quick, I wanted to also show let me show you the share form too. I'm sorry. So this part here, this is just like a normal share form, right? But the only thing we're doing is overriding the default control and pointing to ours, telling it what schema to use, and what width the control should be on the screen. So that's really it. The web script, let me go back. So the web script basically, pulls back JSON data that's digested downstream. So that's the runners one. Let me do the branch data one. It's a little easier to digest. So you can see the simple metadata is here. The nested data is all here. And so it's all been packaged up into basically a JSON structure that can be used downstream. And so we have and my web script is extraordinarily simplistic. It doesn't have any query. It just grabs everything that's a certain type of document and pulls it back. They use a little more elaborate logic as far as like date ranges and certain ID numbers and so forth. But for an example, this works pretty well. It pulls everything back. So based on that, I mean, the key points of this solution, they've been using this for probably close on a year now. When we designed this solution, no repository tier customization is really required to do. Oops, I'm not in presentation mode. Sorry. No customization is required to do to the model side, right? The repo side, really. Data is just a formatted string. We're just storing it in a text field. We work within the forms engine of Share. So if you saw when the grid had invalid data, it was bubbling up that status, and it was invalidating or turning off the save button. So we're using a lot of the logic. We use the forms development kit for the tab view and all that good stuff. So we're working within that model. We're following kind of a standard pattern of if we need to extend a form control, we're creating a custom one and tying that into the share structure instead of going off on our own architecture. And behind the scenes, our controller is JavaScript backed by JQuery and JQuery to kind of build up the table and represent the table data. And that's driven by a schema file that manages how the table should be formatted. And yes, you can try this at home, right? I mean, it's fun to play with this stuff. I'll have code examples. And again, I sort of did an Eclipse dump, which may not be very useful right now. And I'll upload AMP files and some more documented instructions so you guys can try it at home. It should run in 3.4, especially 3.4 or 3.45 or later. But I'm running it now in 4.1, and it hasn't exploded yet. We're not doing that in production anywhere. They're still on 3.4, but it should run. I'm running on Enterprise, but I assume it'll run on Community fine. And I have, not only do I have all the stuff, I have the repository models and everything for the customization, so you can try it out without having to really change anything. And then you can go crazy, just build whatever you want. I also have a simple standalone grid example that I put up. It just shows sort of what JQuery is and kind of how you can play with it. It's a one-pager. Literally, it's one HTML page, and I'll show that to you real quick. And this one, so when you create a grid, you typically use a theme, the jQuery theme roller to download the theme files. And so ours is sort of based on smoothness, smooth like butter, right? And this one I had to do something different. So I found Le Frog, which is awesome. It's the hideous green form, but you can really play. And I'm sorry it's so small on the screen, but you can play with it. It does all this. And all the data. I'm not calling out anywhere. This is all just a local data to this actual page. So it's sort of standalone, but it does all this neat stuff, and you can play with it. Does sorting, and it's multi-page. And so I put it up there as an example just to get started. It actually is it's a pretty neat architecture. It's fun to play with. And let me jump back to my slides. I also have a pointer here to JQGrid, the wiki that describes that. Okay. So I appreciate your time today. I hope you guys try it out. Do you guys have any questions today? Anything I can answer? Yes?
Yeah, how do you solve the searching issue with that?
So right now, they don't do a lot of searching into the fields. They do some simple searches. If you need to search, you can. It'll just search the whole string. So there's not a way around that right now. Most of their queries are not like full text search type queries. They have some IDs they search on, like API numbers. So that would be a problem. If you needed, it certainly works. Like if I search within that field, and I had it in the demo, I could actually show that you can search. Actually, I can do that real quick if you want to see. You'll come back with the data, but right. But it'll come back with the data, but you'll hit everything, right? So you may hit column names, right, and stuff like that. So it's limited there. But for their use cases, they're OK with that. They understood that as a problem, and they don't need those fields to be queried directly. Yeah?
Was the use of the XML schema a requirement of JQGrid?
No. It's just us we're passing that to JQGrid. You can do that other ways, but that allowed us to create definition files. So we can have unique definition files per control. So it was a way to sort of dynamically pass in, when we build up the grid, what the schema needs to look like. If you look in the simple page example, we define a grid, and it's all kind of within one page. There's no XML. You're just defining the columns as you go. But it allowed us to be modular and flexible and create as many tables as we needed to. Now, ideally, it'd be really cool if we could somehow figure that out from the original model at the repo level. But this is one extra layer of abstraction, unfortunately, but it works pretty well. Any other questions?
Do you have this source code available?
There's some source up now. I'm going to put, later today or tomorrow, I'm going to put up the actual AMP file so you can try it out. The slides are up there. The simple grid example's up there. And my Eclipse export is there. But we use Maven to do our builds. And like the target paths are a little bit different. So if you try to, it'd be hard for you to figure out where this needs to go into the deployed wars. So if I just put it up as amps, you can just deploy them. So I'll do that. Look for it. If not today, then tomorrow I should have them up. So, blinded. Any other questions? If you do have questions after this, or just want more information, there's two things I wanted to refer you to, and this is in the slide deck online, so you don't have to write down the URL. This is our webinar. One of our client services director, Lisa Hill, did the webinar with Drilling Info, and they actually talk about their business process. So if you want to see kind of the whole process and everything, it's really interesting. They're using Alfresco in a really interesting way, and it's kind of neat to see how they put all these pieces together. Also, if you need to reach us, you can just do info@bluefishgroup.com. That's our kind of main internal email address, and it'll get to us. So feel free to reach out to us that way. And that's it. I appreciate your attention today. Thanks for coming. Take care.